For many years, cold cases, those unsolved mysteries that lingered for decades, haunted investigators and families alike. With advancements in forensic technology and persistent detective work, some of these mysteries have finally been solved. Here's a look at 10 cold cases that were solved after years, even decades, bringing justice and closure to many. 10. The murder of Maria Ridolf, 1957. In 1957, 7-year-old Maria Ridolf was playing outside in Sycamore, Illinois, when she disappeared. Her body was found 5 months later, but the case remained unsolved for decades. It wasn't until 2011, when an old friend came forward with new information, that police reopened the case. The suspect, Jack McCullough, was convicted in 2012 based on circumstantial evidence and testimony from his mother, who said he wasn't home the night Maria vanished. Although McCullough's conviction was later overturned, Maria's case remains a significant example of how persistent investigation can uncover truths hidden for decades. 9. The Golden State Killer, 1970s to 1980s. Between the 1970s and 1980s, California residents lived in fear of a brutal serial offender known as the Golden State Killer. This perpetrator was responsible for a series of rapes, burglaries, and murders across the state, leaving investigators perplexed for decades. The case went cold, but in 2018, detectives made a significant breakthrough by utilizing genetic genealogy to match DNA collected from the crime scenes to Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer. The use of DNA from distant relatives and family tree mapping allowed law enforcement to pinpoint DeAngelo as the suspect. In June 2020, he pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder and sexual assault, bringing closure to the families of his victims and ending one of the most notorious criminal investigations in U.S. history. 8. The murders of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth, 1983 and 1986. In Narborough, England, the brutal murders of two teenage girls, Linda Mann in 1983 and Dawn Ashworth in 1986, sent shockwaves through the community. The cases remained unsolved for years until forensic scientist Alec Jeffreys developed DNA fingerprinting technology in 1987, which revolutionized criminal investigations. This breakthrough allowed police to match DNA found at the crime scenes to Colin Pitchfork. Pitchfork became the first person to be convicted of murder using DNA evidence, marking a historic moment in forensic science. His conviction not only brought justice for the families of the victims, but also paved the way for the use of DNA evidence in criminal cases worldwide. 7. The murder of Christine Jessup, 1984. 9-year-old Christine Jessup disappeared in Ontario, Canada, in 1984. Her remains were found months later, but the case went unsolved for decades. Initially, Guy Paul Morin was wrongfully convicted based on faulty forensic evidence. He spent 18 years in prison before DNA testing exonerated him. The case remained cold until 2020, when DNA evidence linked the murder to Calvin Hoover, a man who had connections to Christine's family. Hoover had died in 2015, but the identification of him as the killer provided some measure of closure to Christine's family after decades of uncertainty. 6. The killing of Tammy Jo Alexander, 1979. In 1979, the body of a young girl was found in a cornfield in Caledonia, New York. For years, she was known only as Caledonia Jane Doe, and her identity remained a mystery. In 2015, advances in DNA analysis helped identify her as Tammy Jo Alexander, a runaway from Florida. The use of forensic science not only highlighted the importance of identifying victims, but also underscored the need for continued investigation into unsolved cases. If you want to support us in our channel, check out our merch in the first link in the description. It will help us to produce more content for you. Enjoy the further video. Visit AmericaFirstMerch.com. 5. The abduction of Carina White, 1987. Carina White was only 19 days old when she was abducted from a hospital in New York City in 1987. Her parents searched for her relentlessly, but their efforts were in vain. For years, Carina lived with her kidnapper and Petway, who raised her as her own daughter. In 2011, now an adult, Carina began to suspect that her upbringing was not as it seemed. Through her research, Carina discovered her true identity and reunited with her biological family. And Petway was subsequently arrested and sentenced to prison for the abduction. Carina's story is extraordinary, as it was her own determination and instincts that led to the resolution of her case more than 2 decades after her abduction, highlighting the resilience of the human spirit. 4. The case of Alicia Navaro. In a surprising turn of events, the case of Alicia Navaro, a 14-year-old girl who disappeared from Glendale, Arizona, in 2019, was finally resolved in 2024. Alicia was last seen leaving a note for her mother, stating she was running away, which sparked a wide search by local authorities and the FBI. After years of uncertainty, Alicia reappeared in July 2024 in a small town in Montana, approaching police on her own and asking to clear her missing status. 3. The disappearance of Dorothy Jane Scott, 1980. Dorothy Jane Scott vanished in 1980 from Anaheim, California, after receiving frightening anonymous phone calls. Despite extensive searches and investigations, her remains were not found until 1984, and no suspect was immediately identified. Over the years, the case remained cold until advancements in forensic technology prompted investigators to look into Mike Butler, a man who had reportedly stalked her. Although Butler had died by the time he was identified as a suspect, this breakthrough provided Dorothy's family with a possible explanation for her tragic fate, bringing an end to years of agonizing uncertainty. 2. The murder of Evelyn Cologne, 1976. In 1976, authorities discovered the body of a young woman and her unborn child near a Pennsylvania highway. For over 40 years, she remained unidentified and was known only as Beth Doe. In 2021, genetic genealogy revealed her identity as Evelyn Cologne, a New Jersey teenager who had gone missing. Further investigation led to her boyfriend, Luis Sierra, who was charged with her murder. Evelyn's case highlights the potential of modern technology to not only identify victims but also seek justice long after a crime has occurred. 1. The murders of the Alaskan serial killer Robert Hanson's victims, 1970s to 1980s. Robert Hanson, infamously known as the Butcher Baker, was a serial killer who terrorized Alaska in the 1970s and 1980s, murdering at least 17 women, many of whom were sex workers. Convicted in 1983, several of his victims remained unidentified for years. However, advancements in forensic science in 2014 allowed investigators to identify some of these women, including those missing since the 1970s. These identifications provided closure for the families and highlighted the crucial role of forensic science in solving cold cases. Hanson's case serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by marginalized individuals and the ongoing need for justice. In conclusion, these top 10 cold cases solved after decades represent only a fraction of the unsolved cases that still exist. Thanks to advancements in forensic technology, the dedication of law enforcement, and the power of public involvement, more cold cases may be solved in the future, bringing justice and closure to families who have waited far too long. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you.